gentlemen, tonight is a night of the mysteries, and you're all here for them. Thank you so much for coming out on a Saturday night to central London. It falls to me to welcome you to Treadwell's and to say how happy and honoured we are to be hosting this launch. Peter and Alcestis founded Scarlet Imprint, and since the day it was founded, it's gone from strength to strength, as all of you who are their fans and supporters know, as well as we do. It's a delight to hand over to Alcestis, who's going to tell us a little bit about this amazing, amazing book, and then introduce our author, who's going to give a 30-minute talk. Alcestis, here you are.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. So this is Peter's book, and okay.
You're on camera.
What to say?
It's
when
gorgeous.
Peter presented us with the manuscript, I had no idea what an ordeal and a process of initiation working on it would be in itself. So the realization of this book has been a very intense experience of bringing to life Peter's vision and his understanding of the mysteries. And I wanted the way that it was laid out, the way that the imagery worked throughout it, to gradually lead you into the mysteries. So to introduce you first of all to the villa as a ground plan, as an idea, to open up on a picture of the room itself, so that you have this like glimpse of the spatial awareness of how it feels to actually be in that room, and then to gradually bring one through it in a more cinematic sense, so that you're as if you're walking through the different stages and seeing each thing light up at the different moments of the initiation. So I think it's a very interesting collaboration in terms of what Peter did in his research and how he brought so many different, like a very interdisciplinary work he did, so bringing different scholarly material to it, but also his understanding as an actual like practicing ritualist. He knows the metaphysics as well as the sort of practical or the historical and the linguistic aspects of it. And so it was my job to bring that to life visually and to give a sense of this process, this moving through space, and I think it worked. I think I did okay with it. I think I did justice to
It's gorgeous
your
book.
thesis. And
Gorgeous book.
yeah, Dionysus was, there,
Yeah.
driving me on and making sure I did it right. So I just want to hand over to Peter, who will talk about the ritual grammar of the Villa of the Mysteries,
Yeah.
room 5.
Okay, thank
Peter.
you. Okay. First of all, thanks to Christina and Treadwell's and the staff here for making this possible. And secondly, to Scarlet Imprint, Peter Alcestis and Paul Holman for bringing this project to fruition, realization. I couldn't imagine when I started writing the text that it would manifest itself in such a beautiful artifact. It's entirely appropriate for a deity like Dionysus, so that's worked beautifully. The title of the talk, Ritual Grammar and the Logic, I want to get into the frescoes because that's where the essence of this is. So I don't want to spend time on the background, but it's worth bearing in mind that the essence of these mysteries is that the vegetation deities were always the literally grassroots deities of the ancient world. They were not the deities that the elites worshipped. They were the deities of everyday life, of toil in the fields, the agricultural cycle. And indeed, the metaphor of birth and death and life again is entirely founded on their natural cycle. So as we go through this notion of the grassroots of the mysteries is an important one for understanding the ritual process in the frescoes. Okay. I just wanted to point out on this slide that the vegetation deities of the ancient world were numerous. I mean, every single culture had one. This is Dionysus from Anatolia, Dionysus of the vineyard. And over time, he's evolved into the more familiar figure of Dionysus over there with the wine jug. I don't want to pursue the history of the evolution of these deities any further because I want to get to the frescoes. Their presence on the Italian peninsula is explained by the colonies founded by Greece from the 8th century on, and especially those around Naples in the top left there. Cumae was one of the earliest, 800 BC. And its proximity to Pompeii helps to explain the intense ritual life that we see manifested in the frescoes themselves. The deity himself, although his roots are lost in the past, surfaces briefly in Linear B and then in the early Homeric hymns in Hesiod, but there's no visual representation of the god before the mid-6th century. And the tyrant Pisistratus' reorganization of Athenian political and social life at that time gave a huge boost to the mysteries and to the festivities around the deity. They started receiving state funding, and of course that led to massive increase in the competitive performances of dithyrambic chorus and satyr play, and from those evolved the dramatic forms of comedy and tragedy. So that within a century or so, we have Euripides Bacchae winning the first prize at the city Dionysia. And that play kind of encapsulates more of the deity's spirit than anything else. So the mid-6th century then, all of a sudden we see this huge outpouring of painted ceramics in which the deity features very strongly. And at the same time, the ceramics display him in conjunction with only female followers. So it's interesting that right from the beginning, the deity was especially selected as the deity of women. And again, from the 6th century, we see the women conducting ritual in the absence of any male influence. So this is important because it also casts light on the makeup, the figures who feature in the frescoes. The existence of mystery cults alongside the festivities is attested again from the 6th century. In Olbia in Sardinia, we have the connection between Dionysus and the followers of Orpheus, the Orphikoi. And in Cumae, we have a graveyard which is reserved only for the Bacchoi, that's to say the initiates of the mysteries. So we're looking at a tradition which is attested for 5 centuries before the frescoes were painted. And in this case, this is a representation of Dionysus and Semele, and you can see they're exchanging the secret cult hand signal so that the deity gives the horned hand, and Semele, acting as the proto-Mystai, or the exemplary female figure in the context of the mysteries, answers with this alternating finger gesture to the lips, as though to say, I see, but I don't say. It underlines the sacrality of these rites. In all the 1,000 years that they were practiced, apart from the frescoes that we're going to look at, there's no mention of how the rituals were actually enacted. The secrecy was maintained totally for 1,000 years. And it's only by a pure accident, of course, that they survived in this villa. This is the back of the enormous Roman villa on the edge of Pompeii, and the room down on your bottom right contains 2 small rooms which are highlighted on the plan. They're conventionally referred to as rooms 4 and 5. The small one is an antechamber and has a small doorway cut into the wall, giving access to the larger room 5. So the 2 are sharing an intense Dionysian imagery, so that they're clearly connected in function. It's ironic, really, that the most sumptuous display of this deity's imagery should occur in an elite Roman villa, because this deity was cited or lionized in the context of about every major revolt against the Roman elite. The three Mithridatic wars, the Servile wars, the Athenian uprising, and especially the social war that brought the Romans into Campania. In all those instances, Dionysus, as the grassroots deity of these communities, was placed in a position of resistance to Roman imperialism. So it's ironic now that his most sumptuous representation is exactly in the most elite villa imaginable. This is just simply to give you an idea of the layout of the frescoes in the room. The room has this enormous double doors and a huge double window, so the artist had to encompass the imagery within the irregularity of the space that was available to him. This is the room 4, the antechamber. And the painting is typical for the second style of Roman wall painting. It's in 3 bands that run around the room. The central band is divided by these faux pilasters to give these like red panel effects. And in each panel, a Dionysian figure is featured, in this case, a priestess and a corybantic dancer. Now, this basic format is taken into the main room, but you'll see the contrast between this and what is in the main room gives you an idea of how the space was reconceptualized. The central band has been enormously enlarged to create these huge panels, and then at a later date, the artist has come in and added the figures on top of the background. And he's done so in such a way that the figures cross the architectural boundaries of these vertical uprights, and the groups of figures overlap with each other, so that the whole thing has a cinematic effect. Okay, it's almost like a strip cartoon. We need to think of this room under 2 different lighting conditions. One is when it's prime for ritual use. This would be nighttime rituals. It would be lit by flickering torchlight. There would be incense, there would be chanting, dance, and the flickering light would animate these life-size figures within that space. There'd be deep shadow and bright light and the kind of flickering effect on it. So I describe the space as heterotopic. It's designed to function in this way to disorientate and facilitate the ingress into other states of consciousness. It's one of the factors that has been deliberately planned in order to enable the mystery rites to function. The other function of this is when this room is lit with normal daylight, it encodes within it a ritual praxis, which I'm going to describe shortly, and the metaphysics that underlie that practice. In other words, it operates as a theatre of memory. It enables you to recover the ritual process and its underlying theory. And for that reason, I think this constitutes a language. When we look at this, we think of Renaissance art, like Michelangelo, in which the figuration is imaginative, it's creative, it plays with, say, biblical texts. But at the end of the day, it's something unique to the artist. This visuality echoes that, but it's entirely different. This is not the Renaissance, even though the figuration is proto-Renaissance. This is a different language, and we have to adjust our visuality in order to understand it and read it off. This is a corner of a much larger floor mosaic. It's on the African continent. It's separated by 2 to 3 centuries from the Villa of the Mysteries, and it's in a completely different artistic medium. I just want to show the contrast between these 3 figures and the ones you'll see in the frescoes. I won't spend much time on them, but you can see immediately there's a language here. Okay? So how this continuity of imagery was achieved, we really don't know, but the artist is not working in the same way in which a Renaissance artist would have worked. He's working from a style book, and this style book effectively is the grammar by which the ritual process is articulated. So this vase is from, I think, 4th or 5th century BCE. It depicts the same scene as in the frescoes, but it does so explicitly. It shows what's in the basket. By the time of the frescoes, it's covered up. The frescoes are elusive. They're suggestive, but they're concealing and revealing in a very sophisticated way. This figure looks like, again, a Renaissance figure. In fact, it's based on this Maid of Anzio style carving. So the artists obviously have a vocabulary with which to express the ideas. And again, a cameo of Dionysus and Ariadne matches almost exactly the frescoes. Those two are fairly contemporary with each other, but it shows in an entirely different artistic medium and separated by geography. Nevertheless, the same language is being spoken. Okay, so from the north wall, we're into the frescoes now. Just want to keep an eye on the time. I don't want to run along too much. This is important. We know from classical sources, and I've been emphasizing the grassroots nature of Dionysian initiation. We know from classical resources that the initiation was enacted by itinerant lineage-holding families. Okay? This is not the cult of Eleusis or Samothrace, where you have a permanent institution, a hierarchy of priests and priestesses and all the infrastructure. This is a cult based on visiting initiators. And there was a lot of, Plato is very scathing of these people. He calls them the Orphiotelestae, the Orphic initiators, and he thinks they're, it's sleight of hand, that they're a bit of a con act. Which is an appropriate point of view for an elite Athenian, presumably. Certainly by the 3rd to 2nd century BCE, the states were having these people register, deposit a sealed copy of their liturgy, and demonstrate a initiatory lineage of going back at least 3 generations. Okay, of course paying the relevant taxes. They were then free to operate. I can only imagine in an elite Roman villa such as this, they would be bringing in the best possible people. And it's interesting because of all the figures in the villa. This woman is dressed in a Greek peplos. Okay, she's not a Roman. And the artist has made that explicit. He's given her this arm akimbo posture, but with the wrist bent in. And you can check yourself. With that posture, it's the only one in which the arm muscles remain relaxed. All the other ones tense the biceps or so on. That's interesting detail. And he's then given her this strange veil. Now, as far as we know, the Greek women attended the mysteries bareheaded and were not even allowed to braid their hair. In fact, there was an enormous number of restrictions on what people could wear in attending the mysteries. And the reason for that is to keep the sumptuous decoration to absolute minimum. But the artist has given her a veil, and this posture occurs in Roman art. It's called paideia, and it's typical of a priestess. Okay, she holds the veil, and it covers part of the hand. It's sacred. So the artist is conveying that this is a Greek initiatory family group, and that this is the priestess. She's the initiatrix for this ritual process. The small boy will be a relative. He reads the liturgy. They could be as young as 4 years old. And the woman, there's possibly a mother, because she's supervising his reading of it, especially at that age, to make sure he can get through it. Okay, now, how do we explain her role in the initiatory process? And I found that she would have borne 2 cult titles. One is Nymphae, which is bride, and it's typical in a mystery cult. She's the bride of the deity. Her other title is Dracena, that's to say the dragoness. Okay, and we can explain that with reference to this near contemporary Orphic bowl in which the initiates surround a dragon figure that's emanating energy. And the way I read this now is that the initiatrix is somebody with high enough inner energy and connection with the deity to actually affect the ritual space in the most direct way possible. What we're looking at is a version or type of possession cult in essence. Okay? She's capable of being possessed by the deity. The next major figure is this woman, and it's absolutely clear to me from reading the language of the artist that she is the initiate herself. The main reason for saying that is that she's bearing a platter with honey cakes on it. These were called libba, and they were prepared for funerals. And the reason that they were employed in funerals is to buy off the Eumenides, the Furies, okay? Because around the dead and within the context of the mysteries, the interface between this world and another world was thin, to say the least. So there's the danger of the influx of demonic or daemonic entities. She is bearing this plate as a gift or offering to the Eumenides, the Furies, to buy them off. Because in the ritual process, she's the only one who's yet to be initiated. All the others are protected by their relationship with the deity, but she doesn't have that yet. And the classical sources are quite clear that before the deity arrives in the mystery, the demonic forces flow through the ritual space. Okay? So she's also wearing white myrtle on her head, tip of kind of funerary implication. And she has these specially prepared boots. She's the only person with those boots. And we know, again, from ritual prescriptions for the mysteries that their preparation would have been specifically for this rite. That's to say, a sacrifice of an animal, in this case probably a white goat, and the preparation of these shoes. So she's accoutred to undergo the ritual process. Now, absolutely strangely, she is opening a hand and offering it to us and gazing straight out into the room. She's occupying a third dimension outside the two dimensions of the ritual frescoes, okay? And that, I think, is one of the first occurrences of a distinct female gaze in art, in which she is, so to speak, inviting you into the initiatory process. The next group feature these three women around a table. We saw them echoed earlier. It's the ritual of purifying the small statue of the deity. The woman with her back to us clearly has a very elaborate hairdo under the headdress she's wearing. And we'll come back to that later because some of the final scenes show that hairdo in process of preparation. It's a distinct Roman hairdo borne by a priestess. Okay, so it signifies who she is. The actual ritual, they're pouring water onto a sprig, and then she'll use that to flick sacred water onto the statue and purify it. So it's a preparation. What is the statue going to be used for? It'll be placed in the center of the room. It'll be a focus for the dance. There needs to be a dance for the mysteries to get going. In other words, they need to activate the egregore within which the Dionysian mystery exists. And it's activated by the energy of the dancers around the herm. We see this in close-up. And at the bottom, the chair she's sitting on has these peculiar endings. Okay, they look like mushrooms, right? They're intended to look like mushrooms. I studied dozens of pieces of Roman furniture, and not one of them had an ugly kind of ending on the legs of the chairs and tables that look like this. There's no way any woodworker would create such a monstrosity. So the artist has done that, done that deliberately to convey that there's an entheogenic element in the mystery process. We'll come to that. All of a sudden, there's a transition now out of the chronological, forward-moving space of the ritual and into what I've called a dream time. This is the ever-recurring cycle of mythical time. And it enacts Dionysus' reception on Mount Nysa in the form of a goat, where he was suckled by the nymphs and placed under the tutelage of Silenus. The interesting feature here is the small black goat at the bottom, who you see also gazes out into the room. It's almost as though sentience is the message, okay? The deity looks out through so many different eyes. Musical instruments are scattered throughout this fresco cycle. The kithara, 7-string, the panpipe, 7-string. The number 7 is a recurrent one, so it's a reference to celestial harmony. And from Plato, we know the idea that cosmic consciousness is distributed throughout the universe, but in humans, it's liable to get out of balance, out of tune, so to speak. So by enacting the mysteries, through dance and music, you can retune the human soul to be in harmony with the universe. This is how the designer has interwoven metaphysics and ritual process all into the same unified figures. Looking at the east wall, what we have here, sorry, let me go back one. The woman at the end is signaling. She's not alarmed. She's always called the alarmed woman. And, you know, you'll read some academic text saying when she's reacting to a phallus being displayed, you know, she's shocked by it, you know. It astounds me anyone would ever write such a thing. So what she is, she's like a grammatical exclamation mark. She's saying what's coming now is important stuff and you should never talk about it, okay? And the important stuff is in these 4 groups of figures. The first one is a very elusive reference to Dionysus' childhood. He's born from Zeus and Persephone. He's hidden away from the jealous wife, Zeus's jealous wife Hera, and she sends the Titans to go and kill him. He's killed while he's looking at his own reflection. So again, this is right at the core of the Dionysian metaphysics, wherein the reflection is the attachments to the material reality. As long as those attachments are in place, we don't feel the unity of our own soul. Okay, it's scattered in our lives. This is, again, the revelation. Again, a very elusive way that they've gone about this. Instead of showing a phallus, they've shown like a fold in the cloth, which has a roughly phallus shape. So they've been very discreet about the ritual process here. The 2 women, unfortunately lost just behind, are dressed in green. We know from the mosaics from Zeugma, they would be bearing a small jewelry box, and we can see the second figure is actually holding a platter with a Dionysian ritual ring on it. And in fact, if you examine the figures minutely, you'll see all the priestesses already have the ring on the, what we will call the wedding finger. It's a gold ring with a carnelian intaglio. What is happening here is the figure is identified, the whipping figure is identified as Lysa. She's the purveyor of mania, of madness, of loss of equilibrium. She is accoutred as a Dionysian assistant in this case. She appears as such in Greek drama and tragedy, but here she's wearing the nebrus, the skin of the deer. She has buskins on her feet, and she is going to beautiful rendition. I mean, we're looking at 1st century BCE, and it's kind of Renaissance quality art. And this is the scene. She's about to unleash a whipping action onto the initiate whose back is bared. So this is the crux. This is the moment when the initiate becomes possessed by the deity. Now, we talked about the initiatrix bringing the energy. We talked about the ritual dancers creating the ritual space. The fact that the room itself in those conditions is heterotopic, it helps to get into this. We've also identified the use of entheogens, and I've argued in the book that the way they would be administered is the way they would be administered in any hypodermic culture, namely using a dildo, but administered to the rectum. And in fact, parts of Dionysian myth relate him doing just the same thing. Okay, so I'm suggesting that the Alice boy here, the dildo, would have been coated with an extract from the mushroom, which almost certainly was Amanita muscaria, so that the extract would be muscimol, which is a very high stimulant, and administered in this way, it would go straight into the bloodstream. On top of that, the rectal stimulation is an advanced yogic practice in various cultures, okay, because the rectum is so closely connected with the Kundalini energy at the base of the spine. Combination of all these factors is to send the initiate to give a very powerful charge, and her own Kundalini energy should be rising up. And that's the ecstasy that we see portrayed in the naked figure next to her. Okay, this is as well as I can interpret and extrapolate from the frescoes what the ritual process would have entailed. One small point is that for Roman eyes looking at this, the whipping of the back of the naked woman would have immediately given associations with Lupercalia, which is the festival to Pan, the nature deity, the fertility festival that enacted in places like Rome, in which the aristocratic Luperci would run along the sacred road, and women would disrobe to be whipped by extracts or long strips of goat skin from a sacrificed goat. So it has also that association with fertility, as I just mentioned that anyway. Let's go on. And here we have the initiate. Now, the important thing here is we can see that from the tresses of hair that are being prepared, there's 3 on each side of the head, and that's the defining feature of the senicrines, the hairstyle adopted by a Roman priestess. Okay. It's interesting that a mythical figure is proffering the mirror to her. You recall this idea of the mirror of Dionysus as a place where you get dispersion, you get lost in the complexities of life, you lose your sense of being an eternal soul. But here, her gaze is away from the mirror. She's withdrawn those attachments. So she's centered in herself in a very unique way. And here, the gaze, which I say seems to me almost unique in the history of art, and certainly with such a high metaphysical import. I can't think of any other artwork that conveys this so well. The final figure gazes back. In fact, we can map the gaze of these women. They all look towards each other. So it's like they're seeing each other in different phases, okay, across the room. This woman is interesting. Again, you'll notice the ugly bell endings of the, again, you know, they're just it's all in the devil is in the detail, of course. The couch she's sitting on goes into the wall, the north wall, disappears. You only see half of it, and I think that's deliberate. It's the metaphor that the spiritual union she has is with the deity in another dimension. Okay. She's, you know, if you look close up, you'll see she's also wearing the cult ring, and that's the final. There's the gaze. You see from the initiate across to the dressing of the bride, and from the bride, the completed initiate. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Cheers.
This level of detail and research and the eye he has and that he brings to project is just unrivaled. Peter's got an amazing sense of the mysteries from his personal experience, but also his academic standards and research are exceptional, and in that he isn't trapped by the limitations of some of the academic thinking, but he's able to see through these things and develop extremely plausible thesis about really neglected areas.